So again, my name is Mike Mullally. I work for City Parks Foundation and Partnerships for Parks, which we will talk about in a moment. Just want to welcome everyone and appreciate you spending a little bit of your evening with us. Congratulations again on your grant. Why we're having a grant orientation is because a lot's happening, as we all know. So this is emergency funding. This all came together pretty quickly. There's a lot of important things to know about kind of working with your group members, volunteers, working out in open spaces, as well as just the basic grant information. So we really just wanted to try to condense all that information into a couple of evenings and reach as many people as possible. So we just, again, really appreciate everyone being here tonight, and I'll just open up to my colleagues as well to introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. Glad to see some familiar faces on the call, but I'm Lindsay Sierra and our grants manager here at Partnerships for Parks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Becca. I'm the grants coordinator at Partnerships for Parks. Lindsay and I are the grants team at PFP.
I don't know if Emily can hear us, but Emily Sherrod is here, also leading the presentation, and she's the community engagement manager at City Parks Foundation. So the four of us, make up our kind of the New York City Green Fund grant administrators. So at any point you reach out to us with questions, follow up about anything regarding the grants, we are your point people. So I'm sure you've already gotten to know us intimately through all the email communications and everything, but you will continue to do so moving forward.
So I can kick things off. So Mike had mentioned that the City Parks Foundation is acting as the administrator for this Relief and Recovery Fund. And so we just wanted to start off by giving you a little bit more information about who City Parks Foundation is as a nonprofit. And so there are four main pillars of the work that CPF does, one of which is the City Parks shows. We actually have a summer stage show that we're doing digitally this evening as well. And so we offer free entertainment throughout the city. We also offer educational programs through programs like Green Girls, and additionally we have free sports programming throughout the city, so things like tennis, track and field, soccer, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the fourth program area within City Parks Foundation, which is an interesting public-private hybrid, and that's the Partnerships for Parks division. And so I'd mentioned that Partnerships for Parks is interesting in that we are a public-private program between City Parks Foundation, but also between the New York City Parks Department. And so really what we're doing here at Partnerships for Parks is supporting and championing community leaders like yourselves, whether you are either caring for, activating, or advocating for your public green spaces. And so there's a couple of different ways that we support you. We can go to the next slide. And so, one of the easiest ways to get involved is through our It's My Park program. And those are hands-on, kind of instant beautification projects that you can do in any public green space throughout the city that's on New York City Parks property. And we're going to get into, how to be involved in that program in the age of COVID a little bit later in the presentation. And we'll also talk about your outreach coordinators, who are wonderful resources to help navigate you through any city agency processes, but also connect you with other community leaders within your area. And then we also provide things like small grants, which Becca had mentioned. She and I work on our grants team. So we offer small grants as well as public training opportunities, and we'll dive deeper into all of those things, but just to give you a kind of a taste of what we do at PFP.
Great, thanks, Lindsay. So real quick, just some basics about Zoom. If you want to go next slide, Emily. As we mentioned, we want, we know there might be multiple people in your groups working on your grants. I know we had a lot of the grant agreements people were signing required 2 people. So you're bringing other people in the fold and involving them in this grant. And so maybe they're not here tonight. And if you want to kind of share this information with them, where we are recording it. So we will be able to send that around later on. Just so if there is their first time with Zoom, just to let you know that people are currently muted. When it's time, people can unmute them in the bottom left corner. There's an unmute button. But yeah, we are looking we will keep people muted for the time being. You can also use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. There should be something that says chat. People can type in, as they have been, saying who they are, where they're from. If you have questions at all, we will be collecting questions to answer them during the Q&A session. So feel free to type them in anytime and we'll collect them. There will also be a time, again, around like 6:55 or so that people can start just dropping them in there. So either or works.
Great, so folks have already been kind of introducing themselves in the chat, but we're going to take a few minutes now to break out and ideally answer a couple of questions and get to know the folks kind of in this cohort of applicants, or awardees rather, a little bit better. So if we can go to the next slide, we're going to ask you guys to, in some smaller groups, share your name and the borough that your green space is within, the community group that you're a part of, what you hope to use this grant for, or what you submitted as your idea, and then share amongst the room kind of any challenges that you guys might be facing as well.
Yeah, we know there's opportunities to connect constantly, or we want to try to create those opportunities in this kind of more virtual mode. So we'll take about 8 minutes or so. I'll send around, people will be placed in different breakout rooms. So in just a moment, you'll see something pop on your screen, just accept it, and you'll be sent to a room with some other people. And as Lindsay mentioned, to answer those questions and have a brief discussion, and then we'll bring you back and resume the presentation. So I will do that right now. So we wanted to just give a highlight real quick of, again, the fund and the makeup of it. As you might recall, the New York City Green Relief and Recovery Fund was put together in the late spring pretty quickly from a number of funders with the aim to provide support to nonprofits and community groups of all sizes to provide essential maintenance and stewardship and care to open spaces, all types of open spaces throughout New York City, to keep them clean, maintain, open, accessible, to the best of everyone's ability, obviously. So that was the aim of this grant. And we had 174 applicants, and we funded 128 groups for a total of $132,500. And even though the map doesn't quite do it justice, this is a high-level overview of the distribution. And you can see the breakdown of, within each borough. And, the types of, we know we're giving you high-level overviews here, but just to give you a sense, keeping spaces clean and maintained is very broad. So some of those type of projects that people could do, right, very stewardship focused around service projects and supplies, as well as the very important, emergency, protective equipment like PPE. So people focus some of their projects around cleaning up dog runs, which were closed for a while, distributing protective equipment to community members at their open space in the park or garden, equipping their volunteers to do work in the coming months, with supplies, with PPE, with tools. Some people are beautifying spaces, not just parks, playgrounds, and gardens, but also malls, street trees, plazas. As I mentioned, there's a wide variety of open spaces that we were supporting, which was really exciting to see. Some people receive money for materials for regular stewardship events, increasing community garden accessibility, prepping, maintaining, planting garden beds, both in parks and in community gardens, tools and equipment to increase their capacity, such as building raised beds or compost systems, as I know our community composting in New York City has been hit hard by the cuts at Department of Sanitation, right? And so people trying to increase their own capacities, which has been exciting to see, and some other like water collection and other similar projects. And just a quick snapshot of where we're at right now. So everyone applied in June. We made announcements in late July. And so starting in early August, several of us, myself, Lindsay, Emily, we've been reaching out to all of you to get information about who are the point people for the grant, how the grant is being, the funds are being distributed to you. And so maybe some of you are still in that process. So if you have not signed your grant agreement or you've not told us yet how you're looking to receive their funds, please do so. But we have been, once we've received grant agreements and signatures, we have been making batch deposits. And so I think 2 or 3 have gone out so far. So the majority of people do have them. If you have a question whether you received your funds or not, you can speak to us separately. We'll definitely be promoting our email, the NYC Green Fund email, pretty often in this session. But we have been wiring them electronically. So if you have questions about if they come or not, don't panic. We can help figure that out for you.
So as Mike mentioned, the vast majority of folks have probably received their grant agreements. If you haven't, definitely reach out to us. But for those who have received and signed off on your grant agreement, you'll see at the top what we call the allowable expenses. And so there'll be a line that looks very similar to this, and it'll list a series of items that you have been approved to use your funding for using the grant that you were just awarded. So in this example, it says soil, tools, plants, and personal protective equipment. And let's say that your award was for $1,000. You and the members of your group, it's up to you to decide how you break up that $1,000 to pay for the soil, tools, plants, and PPE equipment. So we're not going to tell you that you have to put a certain amount of money towards each item within your allowable expenses. That's up to your discretion to do. We also understand that circumstances are going to change. It's a long grant year ahead of you, and a lot of the circumstances have changed already. So should you find that you would like to change any of your allowable expenses, we just ask that you reach out to us and get those approved before making any purchases that might fall outside of that listed items. So for example, maybe your local business donates your personal protection equipment to you, and so you don't need to purchase that with grant funds anymore, and instead you'd like to put that towards some other item for the group and the work that you're doing. Definitely just reach out to us. Again, we're going to promote the email that's easiest to reach us by as we move through this presentation, but we definitely emphasize just checking in with us before making any of those changes. We do just want to emphasize, and it's the first time that I'm saying it, but we will repeat it many times in the presentation, that receiving funding from this funding project is not the same as receiving approval for a project. And so we emphasize making sure that you talk to whomever your land management agency is, whether that's the Parks Department or Land Trust or NYRB, but make sure that your projects are getting approved before beginning to execute those projects. All groups are required to follow all of the guidelines of the agency that manages your land. And if you have any questions or you are having some trouble getting in contact with the appropriate people, you can definitely reach out to us and we can try to make those connections for you. Go to the next slide. Right, your allowable expenses will tell you what you can put your grant towards, but there are a couple of items that your grant can never go towards. And so one is individuals. The second is that this fund is not meant to support public programming. It doesn't support fundraisers and materials that are going to be sold for profit. Any capital construction improvements. So if you're looking to lay down a new basketball court, this isn't the fund for you. No electioneering, lobbying, or litigation. And again, no projects that have not been approved by your land management agency. And then we're just going to quickly touch on, there will be 2 opportunities to report back to the funders throughout your next grant year. So the first will be in February. We will ask for an interim report, and then a year from now, we will ask for a final report. And those reports are going to cover things like your financial statements. So for the groups that are receiving their funding directly, we ask you to hold on to like your receipts, itemizing your purchases, again, making sure that you made purchases that aligned with your allowable expenses, our narrative report, and we're going to follow up with what the actual structure of those questions and report will look like. And then we also want to see all of the fun stuff, so things like photos, flyers from the projects that you're putting on as well.
Great. And we are seeing some questions pop up in the chat, so thank you for asking those. We are collecting them, and we'll definitely address them in a few minutes shortly. So moving on, we did want to just touch base. You know, we know this is a pandemic. We know that working and being in your open space, it looks a lot different. There are things constantly changing, so we just wanted to provide some brief updates about some of those spaces. We know maybe some of you are not working in some of these spaces, but at the same time, everyone lives near, you know, parks and gardens, and so it never hurts just to know kind of what is going on. So first, we just want to provide some COVID-19 updates, kind of going on with the New York City Parks Department. You can definitely go to their service announcement page for the most up-to-date information on facility closures, program cancellations, and service changes. As people, you know, may well know, there were a lot of things, you know, playgrounds and dog runs, courts, where a lot of things were closed for a while. City parks are now open, so, and they're asking people to wear face coverings and maintain at least 6 feet of distance when outside and congregating in groups. Park restrooms are open again. Playgrounds, as I mentioned, are open, although play equipment is not sterilized. Dog runs are reopened. 15 public pools have reopened, so not all of them, but through September 7th, there are a few. All New York City recreation centers are closed to the public for now. And just the other day, the Parks Department started permitting again for sports programs. Maybe people have seen in the news, but there definitely has been a huge impact on parks as people are, you know, flocking back outdoors and getting out into their open space. You know, there has been increased park use, you know, especially with, you know, as restaurants and indoor vendors have closed and guys moved outside, you know, has been increased usage in litter. That on top of kind of the fiscal crisis that's happening in the city has resulted in budget cuts across the board, and the Parks Department is a part of that. And so just kind of painting a picture of maybe why you're seeing a lot of attention being drawn to, you know, trash in parks and litter. You know, there has been an $84 million cut to the Parks Department's budget, which is about 14%. And so they were unable to hire, you know, 1,700 seasonal maintenance staff. You know, so that means that there has been, you know, a decrease in staff cleaning parks to the point of reduced maintenance hours of close to 25,000 hours a week. So they're not visiting close to 400 sites as often. And so, yeah, it's a lot. And so I know there's been a lot of media attention on it. So we just wanted to kind of paint that picture and even highlight the importance of this grant and all the work that all of you are looking to do and been doing. And so, you know, now is such an important time, and we really appreciate all the work that people are doing. Next slide. In addition to that, and obviously supporting volunteer groups, the Parks Department is embarking on their own anti-litter campaign that just launched, I believe, last week, to try to mitigate some of these issues. So in their phase 1 of this campaign, they're targeting particularly, you know, picnic and barbecue areas. Some of the things they're looking to do is create some trash corrals that you see in the bottom right corner of the slide. You know, it's very visible. Where they'll be putting about 100 of those in heavily used parks, you know, just to store trash and everything. They're also looking to put stickers on garbage cans and start to you know, as we're opening back up and doing more to get more volunteer projects up and running. And obviously a lot of people in this, you know, who receive grants are looking to do this, but everyone can lend a hand. You know, we're just trying to share the anti-litter message. And so if you want to spread that to your network, neighborhood, neighbors, group members, you can also connect with your local outreach coordinator to let them know how you're helping to reduce litter, which is really helpful. And there's also a thing, if you're not familiar with, is the Play Fair Coalition, spearheaded by New Yorkers for Parks, an advocacy organization that is looking to, or continues to fight for parks and open spaces. So we'll send out more information about that.
Great, so now we're going to talk a little bit about gardens. We know that not all of the awardees are operating within parks and playgrounds, and so we just wanted to review some garden policies and resources on this call as well. So first and foremost, all activities must follow the city's health and wellness guidelines. And so right now, public convenings and events and gardens are not currently being approved. We also wanted to highlight that no money can be used for purchasing equipment that stores gasoline or other flammable fluids. So these are things like generators, lawnmowers, without the approval from their land management agency. And if that land is under the jurisdiction of the Parks Department, then it is very, very unlikely that it would ever be approved. So we also encourage groups to reach out to Green Thumb, and I'll explain who Green Thumb is if you're not familiar on the next slide, or their land management agency for guidelines or support before coordinating any purchases or services with vendors. So doing things such as like purchasing soil, any construction or repairs that you might be doing to the infrastructure in the garden, any rat abatement, food distribution, or wood chipping should all be approved by your land management agency before you go ahead and make any of those purchases or line up any of those services. And then I had mentioned Green Thumb. So if you're not familiar, Green Thumb is the community garden division of the New York City Parks Department, and they can support gardens that are on land under New York City Parks jurisdiction, but they also sometimes support gardens that are operating on other lands, so things like land trust, NYRP, and so they can also receive Green Thumb materials or support. And some of those materials and support can be things like free soil, lumber, fencing, compost, mulch, and wood chips to gardens that are in good standing, depending on their availability. And so similarly to Partnerships for Parks, Green Thumb also has outreach coordinators, and they are wonderful resources in kind of navigating the processes on those last two slides. And so you can, use this link to identify who your outreach coordinator is. We're also going to provide you with the Green Thumb handbook and then point you to any service changes that are taking place. They're listed on Green Thumb's website as well. And we're going to, if we haven't said so already, we're going to give out this presentation at the end of today's meeting. So don't frantic if you couldn't jot down that lengthy URL.
So we've talked about kind of what's going on with the New York State Parks Department. We talked about, some community gardens with, happening with Green Thumb. We want to touch on briefly what's happening with us at Partnerships for Parks, and one of the main programs that we offer, our It's My Park program. So for those who aren't familiar, people can organize volunteer beautification and park cleanup events through us at Partnerships for Parks. And so we just wanted to provide some updates to that program there. So first and foremost, anytime you do anything in a park or want to do something in a park, you definitely need to seek the park manager's approval for all projects. So that goes without saying. It doesn't matter in what park or what project, you definitely need to seek the Parks Department's approval. And so there are park managers who oversee districts within the entire city. And so there's a park manager for the space near you. And so it's really important to get in touch with them to make sure that the projects that we funded and other things you want to do are supported by the Parks Department. And so we can obviously make that connection, which I'll touch on in just a moment. People can organize their own volunteer projects through holding their own, and doing so through applying to our program through the leader application. This allows you to get those approvals through the Parks Department, so you don't need to do it on your own. We help facilitate them and also track the impact that you are all having across the city. And then we also really help connect you with your outreach coordinator to have those, project planning, important project planning discussions. So due to the health crisis, we have adjusted our program slightly and procedures. So before you host your first It's My Park project this season, group leaders must attend a safety orientation and review our volunteer guidelines. Again, we'll send this out in email so you can access it there. These guidelines outline the procedures volunteers should follow to help stop the spread of COVID-19, such as performing a self-health check and not volunteering if you're sick, making sure people are wearing masks and maintaining the proper 6 feet distance. And so what this also looks like on the operations side, as I mentioned that, the Parks Department's maintenance and operations division has been hit pretty hard. Typically before the pandemic, you would organize a project and we would work with the Parks Department to deliver the tools needed for your project. And those kind of a wide range of items that we could help connect you and deliver. That is a bit more in question given the significant impact because of the budget cuts. So we're trying to help connect groups to start doing work now. So some key changes that we've made is we are providing some toolkits for groups to keep and use long term, and while these toolkits last. Rather than the delivery of the hard tools. Maybe once in a while it might occur, but we try and temper expectations and equip people with what we can at the moment. We are encouraging group sizes to be limited to 10 participants, which we can be supported with the toolkit. However, groups of up to 25 volunteers in parks are allowed, but are obviously subject to approval depending on multiple factors, such as the size of the park, type of the project, and the availability of tools. And weeding and trash pickup and street tree care are often the biggest priorities around some of these spaces and utilized by the toolkit. And what do we mean when we say connecting you with a free toolkit? Well, these are the type of bags, with gloves, garbage bags, grabbers, cultivators, a variety of things, hand sanitizer. So we are putting this together, and this is what you would be equipped with, or one of the things if you were to go through the It's My Park program. And as I mentioned, as Lindsay mentioned, there are Green Thumb outreach coordinators to connect you with all your community garden needs. Partnerships for Parks has outreach coordinators in all of the boroughs as well to help, again, connect you to the Parks Department, be that liaison between the two, help get approvals for things, and just help support you in the work that you want to do in your open space in your local park. So again, we'll provide information for who everyone's outreach coordinators are in the follow-up email. I just want to give you a brief example of what that looks like. And we'd be remiss to say that, to go over some of our resources, our partnerships for parks, and not talk about some of the other funding opportunities we provide. So as we mentioned earlier, Partnerships for Parks is a joint program of the Parks Department and City Parks Foundation. And so we typically support projects that are solely on land under the jurisdiction of the Parks Department. So in the Green Fund case, we were able to broaden it a bit, but typically it is for parks who are, groups who are working in community gardens, street trees, parks, playgrounds, malls that are kind of under the jurisdiction of the Parks Department. So we have some funding opportunities to complement that. Our next capacity fund grant is on November 1st, and Lindsay and Becca are leading that, and we'll be providing more information soon with some info sessions in September. We also have a fundraising opportunity with partnership with IOB, stands for In Our Backyards. They're amazing. If you're not familiar with them, people can crowdfund through them, and we've developed a program to have a matching crowdfund. So a group, working in a park could apply, hey, we need $1,000 for a shed that's been approved by the Parks Department. And if you were to raise 500, then you would be matched 500. So we can talk a lot more about that separately, but just wanted to let you know that those are currently happening. And then one other resource from Partnerships for Parks, we are holding workshops. So we held one last night about creative programming during COVID. We have one kind of fittingly around fundraising on September 10th. So we hope you will join us there. And there are a couple other announcements Emily will provide real quick.
Hi guys, so while we have 60 community leaders from all across the 5 boroughs, we wanted to do a quick plug. If you haven't taken the census yet, please go get online and fill it out. You can also call 844-330-2020 to fill out the census via phone. Last week when I checked, our response rate in the city was at 57%. The average across the nation is at 64%, so we are pretty low right now. So we would like to try and see if we can make that up. And the more groups that are out there spreading the word, the better off chance we'll have of doing that. So if you can, just spread the word. Door knockers have started. Somebody stopped by my apartment today to ask about my neighbor. So I highly encourage you to call or fill it out online if you haven't yet. And let your friends know too. And then the other plug would be to check your voter registration. We're working with Headcount this year through our Summer Siege Anywhere series. So we've got a link right here. You can go online to check your voter registration and get that set up for this fall.
Thanks, Emily.
And next,
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go for it, Emily.
So next up, we've got the question portion of our evening. So I'm going to turn off the screen share. We will be pulling your questions from the chat. We've also got a couple of questions that came up from our last webinar that we'll tackle at the beginning. And as a reminder, after we go through the questions portion, we're going to have a section of the evening that's specifically reserved for the fiscally sponsored groups that we're going to be working with. We will have a list of those before we wrap up, like before we move on. We'll put a list up of all the groups that are required to participate in this next section. So please don't drop off during the middle of the FAQs if you are one of the groups that's fiscally sponsored. All right, Becca, you want to start with some of the FAQs from last time?
Sure, that would be great. So I don't know if we are able to put the questions on the screen again, or I'll just go over some of the previously frequently asked questions. So one question that a lot of folks asked last time was, can amounts be adjusted to purchase items under allowable expenses? Yes, you can allocate your funds to your allowable expenses how you like. If you receive $500 for plants and tools, but decide you only want to put the money to tools, that's a-okay, totally fine. You cannot, however, move the funds around to buy items not on your previously approved allowable expenses. Definitely check your grant agreement to ensure what your approved allowable expenses were. And if you can't seem to find it, I'm sure one of us would be happy to resend it to you. Another question was in regards to grant reporting. One person asked, what do we do with our receipts? That is a very good question. A final report will be due at the end of the grant term, which is August 2021, and the receipts will need to be submitted. So definitely hold on to all those receipts, make copies. Definitely suggest taking photos of the receipts with your phone, upload it to the cloud, or have it somewhere that's so you can't lose it. So definitely encourage you to take photos of your receipts for a later date. So those are some of the most frequently asked questions, and I think now we'll sort of go through some of the questions that you might have asked earlier in the presentation and tackle those now. So one of the first questions that was asked is, can you change the method of how you receive the grant?
Yeah, and so if you, we had mentioned before that there were a couple of different ways that you could access the funds from your award. If, for example, you asked to receive those funds directly and you would now like City Parks Foundation to hold those funds for you, or vice versa, we would just recommend that those specific groups reach out to us at that NYC Green Relief email address, and we can talk through make sure that we're all understanding what those options are and which one might make the best sense for you and your group right now. So you're certainly not wedded to it, but let's talk about what might be the best fit.
Great, thank you, Lindsay. Mike, how about you? Could you define what public programming means?
Yeah, and obviously I open this up to my colleagues as well if I don't do the best job explaining, but the focus of this grant, I mean, one might argue that anything happening in a park could be public programming, but the focus of this grant was really around beautification, cleanup, stewardship, caring for that space. So when we talk about public programming, or that, this grant currently does not support public programming, it just means things that go beyond that stewardship, beautification, cleanup projects. So I know we've often funded through our capacity fund grant, art programs, music programs, things that are happening in the park. Things that are not stewardship related, that are open to the public free of charge. So those, which while wonderful programs, are not the focus of this grant. So I don't know if there's anything else that people wanted to add to that.
No, I think that covers it. Any congregation of people for some activity or engagement, like a concert or fitness, that isn't necessarily just stewardship like Mike had mentioned.
Great, thank you. I know this is a question on a lot of people's minds, and wondering if you guys have any recommendations in terms of vendors for PPE supplies or tools. Do you guys have a pre-approved list of vendors?
Great question. We do have a volunteer program at Partnerships for Parks, right, who are spearheading the It's My Park program, and we have been working with a couple vendors. So while, I'm sure there are many out there, we'd be happy to share the ones that we're working with. I know the City Parks Foundation has also been trying to get PPE from some other vendors, have been doing their own research. So there's been a couple that have sporadically popped up that we could try to wrangle together, but off the top of my head, I don't have a designated one or one a go-to. I don't know if any of my colleagues have any idea.
We have some on file from the It's My Park program. I think we could probably include it in the follow-up email that goes out to everybody.
Great, I think that'd be super helpful for sure. So now to restrooms. Are there any universal hours for park restrooms? One group's restroom in their park has been closed in the late afternoons recently. Do you know anything in regards to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think each park kind of, and each district has their own kind of, each borough kind of operates a little differently. So even though it's, the Parks Department is citywide, each borough has its own borough commissioner, and, they all approach things a little differently. I would say if you have questions about your local park's restroom, to get in touch with your park manager to understand kind of what's the situation happening. And again, if you're not sure who that person is, we can certainly put you in touch by connecting with your outreach coordinator, and really getting to know, your local park staff is really important, and helps kind of try to clarify some of the issues that come up. So that would be my recommendation.
One thing to bear in mind around the hours would just be that since we did see such a huge reduction in the Parks Department staff on site this year, that can also impact things like the restroom hours. If there's just not, if there's not another shift coming in because there's not people in that job right now, then restrooms are probably closing earlier in some areas.
Thanks for the clarification, Emily. And so this is a question about final reports or interim reports as well. Can folks prepare an interim report in, say, like Microsoft Windows or Google Docs, or will you send them a form that needs to be filled out?
So we mentioned before that we don't currently have the exact or final format that our interim and final reports will look like. That interim report will be due in February of 2021. So we'll make sure to send what that format looks like. But if you're starting to do your programs right now and want to start to jot down or track some of the expenses that you have, I would certainly encourage kind of just starting to keep track of the outcomes of your project, as well as any of the financial records if you're spending any of your grant funds before we give you what that final format will look like.
Thanks for that. And also, so going back to the anti-litter campaign, are people able to get the anti-litter message trash cans for their site to leave in front of their green spaces?
So there is, I know there is a distribution plan to get some materials out. Like I know Partnerships with Parks, for example, is getting, I think 1,000 posters to distribute to our partners and businesses and community members. If you're interested, definitely reach out. I can't guarantee, we're still kind of ironing out the distribution process and we haven't received the materials yet. But if you're interested, please, let us know, drop us an email. That'd be great.
I'd recommend reaching out to your Partnerships for Parks outreach coordinator if you have one, if there's a specific message that you like, if you want this sticker specifically for your park.
Yeah, and I think some people are interested also to integrate the anti-litter campaign graphic potentially in their social media. So yeah, though I think it would be great if folks could connect with their outreach coordinators and get a sense of if that messaging and campaign graphic would be accessible to them. And so there's another question in regards to how do we know who our land management agency is? That is a important question.
So we've already kind of made some plugs for outreach coordinators, and this is another opportunity to talk about reaching out to them to figure out who your land management agency is. If you're operating on a garden, you can reach out to Green Thumb. If you're operating in a park playground or some other form of open space, you can reach out to us and we can verify. And we can follow up with you to figure out, whose jurisdiction the land is under.
Great. This park group, which is Friends of John Hancock Park, has hosted It's My Park event 3 weeks ago, and they were interested in getting a toolkit for this week's cleanup. Is that possible, or what's the timeline for getting one of those toolkits?
I think we're about to make a new purchase, so I think we're probably getting pretty low, but I think that'd be important to, again, be in touch with your outreach coordinator for the need there. And if you've already been given one, I think they're trying to give one per group, but if you have not received one, I would definitely reach out to your outreach coordinator about that.
Great, thank you. And do you guys have recommendations for getting water to our space, which are street medians and soil compost? They think their land agency is DOT. Any water accessibility recommendations?
Yeah, off the top of my head, I know Citizens Committee for New York City, another grant-making organization, they've had their Love Your Block grants that often allows the community group to partner with a city agency like DOT, like Parks, to do a project. So while I don't have the exact answer, I think, happy to work with you to reach out to them to see if they have a kind of a partnership or someone to contact regarding that need. But I think, reaching out to us specifically, kind of what's the space, we can try to help figure that out for you.
Well, thanks, Mike. And this is a question in regards to the census. If people wish to facilitate in getting the word out regarding the census, is there a process and language that is prescribed by you?
Hey, this is Millie. We have a toolkit that we can share over with you if you're interested in using that. If you just email us at nycgreenfund@cityparksfoundation.org, we'll send you over the toolkit for the census. We have some images and content that we'd recommend.
And this is a general question about trash cans. With the lack of trash cans, can people purchase cans to fill the overwhelming trash with their grant?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's definitely a first a question to speak to the Parks Department, about, before we just kind of purchase more trash cans and place them all over. So obviously, understand that would align well with their, the kind of the anti-litter campaign. But before we kind of look to purchase and direct funds to those things, to those needs, I would speak with your park manager first, and see what their thoughts are.
And just to another trash-related question, in regards to having park your trash here signage. Is it possible to get that kind of signage at community gardens? This one's on Walton Avenue. They're having some major litter and trash problems. You're wondering who they need to contact to have that delivered. Is it the same process for community gardens as well as park spaces?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not sure what's happening on the kind of the garden side around the campaign. So it's a great question that we should reach out to our partners at Green Thumb and see what's happening. So I appreciate the question, and we can definitely look into that.
If your garden is a Green Thumb garden, I'd recommend checking with your outreach coordinator, because they may be able to more quickly direct anti-litter signage over to you guys as well.
And as one quick thought on the question about purchasing trash cans. I would imagine that the trash cans would have to meet certain specifications. That from the Parks Department, if that was something even allowable. And I'm looking at the trash cans out there that they're pretty bulky, they're pretty heavy. I imagine they don't come cheap, so that would be a pretty significant shift of funds to purchase something. Obviously, we understand that they're important, but just kind of highlighting that we supported, you had a project idea for certain things, and then if that need changes, then please, and you have approvals for things, please reach back out to us, and we're happy to talk more about what if you do desire to kind of shift kind of funds or reallocate them to something. We know, especially now during these moments in time, that needs are constantly changing and things are constantly changing, so we're always happy to discuss those further, so definitely reach out to us.
Thank you. And just a follow-up question. How do the trash corrals work? Do groups bring their trash there, or what's the process exactly?
This is Emily. I haven't seen them in action yet. I don't know if they're actually in place, but I'm under the impression that it kind of just provides a small fenced off barrier area that groups, if you're finishing up a picnic and you have a garbage bag full of stuff, you could drop the garbage bags there, so that it gives one central space for the Parks Department to pull by and pick up all of the garbage bags. In the parks that I visit, I've seen garbage bags kind of scattered throughout. So I think that they're just trying to make sure that there's one specific area. It'll make trash pickup a lot more efficient, especially since garbage cans are overflowing right now.
Thank you. And some folks are interested too in terms of getting a kit or process guide for the Getting Out the Vote initiative. And I think, Emily, you already answered that you'll share that resource toolkit with folks after the presentation. So thank you for that. There was an age-old question about weeds. Somebody asked about any ideas on what we can do to get weeds cut back, because it's a very large area and there are too many weeds for the folks to weed it themselves. And so I'm sure that we have a group of experts here on this call, so I'm hoping that people have some great ideas and we can brainstorm some recommendations or some tips. But if Mike, Emily, or Lindsay, you have any in particular, please feel free to share.
Hey, this is Emily. So from my experience working as an outreach coordinator, it was always best if groups are able to flag if there is a challenge like that, where if it's a Parks Department property, I could always take that to the park manager for the area, let them know about it, and if they're able to address it, they're happy to. I would just say, remember that staffing is a huge problem this summer. This is something that we haven't faced. The city hasn't faced challenges like this in years. So it might be something that they're simply not able to get to. But that doesn't mean that it's not worth trying. So let your outreach coordinator know, and just be as specific as possible and letting them know like the exact intersection that you're seeing the problem so that they can try and direct resources that way.
Yeah, and I would just add on to what Emily said in that if you do end up pursuing an It's My Park program with Partnerships for Parks, we also create like an event page on our website that you can then use to continue to recruit more people. So if you're finding that maybe the project is bigger than the folks that you have in your core group and you need to start recruiting more members of your community to come out and help, it's another way that, you know, we help kind of support you in that effort to get the word out and get more people helping to weed.
There was somebody who asked about, again, about the anti-litter signage, but their community garden is on Department of Education land. Do you have any tips for how they're able to get that signage and be able to use it on that property as well, or have any guidance for that?
I believe that Green Thumb does have a partnership with DOE, and they have an outreach coordinator that's specifically assigned for DOE school gardens. So I'd recommend checking out the Green Thumb handbook and seeing if your garden is one of those that's supported through that program, because that would give you the exact person to reach out to try and address it.
Great, thank you. And this is a question about John Hancock Park. It was stated that no gas machine could be purchased, I believe, with this grant. What about a generator for electric? They are using a power washer and it needs electricity.
I'd recommend checking with your outreach coordinator about this project first in advance. We'd have to make sure that it is ultimately approved by the Parks Department, since it sounds like that project would be taking place on NYC Parks property.
And I think this is maybe one of the last questions. This is from Ali Pond Striders. They have a sign up for volunteers distributing PPE. Can you help advertise this?
Right, so the only items on the City Parks Foundation event calendar would be the ones that we were directly sponsoring. So the It's My Park events would go up on our calendar, but I would definitely recommend reaching out to like your outreach coordinator to see if they would be willing to kind of share it around with some of the other community leaders in the neighborhood as well. But just to kind of clarify, like it's the It's My Park programs that are up on our page website, but if you need help promoting other programs that you're doing that fall outside of that, you can definitely reach out, but it wouldn't necessarily end up on our website.
Great, thank you for answering all those questions. Please feel free to ask or add any additional questions in the chat. I think we've addressed all the ones that people have asked prior to now, but please, we can give like a few more minutes to add any more questions. Definitely there seems to be a pervasive issues for a need for additional trash bags and trash cans. So I think any tips for that would be greatly appreciated.
Thanks, Becca. Looks like the questions have slowed, so I think maybe this is a perfect time to transition to the next phase of the presentation with the remaining few minutes that we have. I know I did see a comment earlier. I know I spoke about distributing posters. There are bags that are being distributed as well. I know Parks Department are going out to folks within parks and handing them bags. I know they're trying to encourage groups to hold cleanup projects. So there's bags there as well available. So again, I think that points back to holding It's My Park projects. We really appreciate everyone's time. We have come to the next phase of the presentation where there are a handful of groups that we at City Parks Foundation are fiscally sponsoring. And so we were going to speak about how those groups can access their funds. Obviously, anyone is welcome, but it looks like people don't have any further questions at this moment. So for those who this does not apply to, you are welcome to hop off. Again, we've sent you the email, NYC Green Fund at cityparksfoundation.org, and you can reach us there at any time. We'll be following up with information that we've discussed today. We really do appreciate everyone's time. And for those who are part of this, the groups that are listed, we'll take a few minutes and just talk about more of how you would access your grant funds. So we'll do that in just a moment. And thank you, everyone. Oh, some people might be on the phone, so I'll just read it really quick. If you're a part of these groups, Melrose New Generation, Minetta Churchill Partners, Friends of Soundview, Friends of Alley Pond Park, Friends of Juniper Valley, Friends of Brookville, Roots Unbound, Earth Citizens Club of Queens, Edgecombe Avenue Tree Support, Friends of Aqueduct Walk, North Longfellow United Block Association, Friends of Pelham Parkway, Rainbow Garden of Life and Health, Friends of Francis Lewis Park, Homegrown Park Volunteers, Friends of Tremont, Friends of St. Nicholas, Friends of Mosholu, and Walton Park Community Garden Group. So if you're on the list that we just named, we will spend the next few minutes just talking about how to access your funds quickly before we let you go to your evening. Again, thank you to everyone again for joining us tonight. We really do appreciate your time and all the work that you're doing and time and energy you're putting in. We all see this and really appreciate it, and we're here to support you. So thank you again.
All right. Just going to echo what Mike said. Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate, we know that it's a sometimes frustrating process to navigate through all of this. And so we really appreciate all that you do to make your green spaces and your communities safe and healthy during these difficult times. So we'll now shift to ways that you can access your funds. Feel free to hop off if this doesn't apply to you. If you're particularly interested, you can stay on. So for the groups who are holding their funds with City Parks Foundation for the duration of their grant, there are two ways that you can access those funds. So the first is reimbursement, and the second is through invoices or quotes, and we call that kind of our payment voucher process. And so now we're going to quickly run through all of the forms that you would need and the process for both of those procedures. So the first I mentioned was the reimbursement process. And what this looks like is if you went to a store or a vendor and you made a purchase out of pocket, you then kept that receipt, you would complete the forms that we're going to review in the next couple of slides. You're going to have the person who's spending the money out of pocket sign off on those forms, but you're also going to have another member of your group sign off as well. You're going to send that information over to us, and then you're going to wait probably between 3 to 4 weeks for those funds to be put into your bank account, compensating you for the purchase that you've made out of pocket. And we can move to the next slide. So this is an example of what your reimbursement request will look like, and this is, an example of a fake receipt. And everything predominantly, the things that you need to put into this reimbursement request form are going to be located on that receipt. So things like the date that you made that purchase, the vendor that you bought it from or who you paid it to, the description of the items that you purchased. So, the items that you got from the store, as opposed to, we get some questions about like, can I submit a bank statement? We'd much prefer to have a receipt that itemizes the specific things that you bought, as opposed to a bank statement that just shows that you spent X amount of dollars at a vendor. So the description of the items that you have, there's this middle section there that'll say like event code, fiscal year. Those will always be the same, so the event code will be NA. Your fiscal year will be the calendar year that you're in, so it'll be 2020. we will provide you with your program code, and it will always start with the letters FC and then be 3 digits afterwards. So we'll follow up with you. It's kind of like an account number, just so that we know that we're pulling the funds from the right group. And then you'll also list the name of the group that you're a part of. And then we also have this section for GL codes, and we're going to give you a full list of what those GL name and codes are. But really what they're for is our finance system will categorize the purchases that you make in accordance with these codes. So things like field materials, artist stipends, etc. Then you're also going to list, I had mentioned before, the person who spent the money out of pocket is going to sign off as the reimbursee. And then there's one other member of the group who's going to sign off. And this is a good way to just make sure that one member of your group is not spending down your whole grant, right? And then you're also going to make a note of, there are some groups here that might be holding multiple grants, like a capacity fund grant in your account, as well as an NYC Green Fund grant. So just list which one of those funds you want us to pull this particular reimbursement from. So now that we are all working remotely, we are no longer cutting checks to individuals. Instead, we're doing direct wire transfers into bank accounts. So in order to make that happen, you'll have to fill in what's called an ACH enrollment form. And so if it's for an individual person who's being reimbursed for an out-of-pocket expense, you can ignore the top section of that sheet. Really, you're just going to fill in your financial information in that middle section. And we strongly encourage putting an email, and one that you check often enough, because you will be notified when those funds are being deposited directly into your bank account. And you only have to do this once. So if it's your first time that you're submitting a reimbursement request with us, you'll fill out this form, but then we'll have it on file when you won't have to keep filling it out each time you submit a reimbursement request. And one important note about reimbursements is that we cannot process any receipts that are outside of a 60-day window. So if you make a purchase today, you have to make sure that within the next 60 days you're getting that receipt and all of those forms to us. Unfortunately, that's just our procedure in our finance department, and we won't be able to reimburse you for something that's a receipt that's older than that window of time. And so the other way that you can make purchases is through an invoice or a quote. So as opposed to going to a store and just making a purchase out of pocket, you could go to a business and ask for an itemized invoice or quote from that vendor. And so similarly, it would list out the items that you're going to purchase, but instead you would then send that invoice or quote to us with a form that looks very much like your reimbursement form. One member of your group would sign off on it. You would send that in to us for us to process. And in 3 to 4 weeks, as opposed to us wiring the funds into your bank account, what we would do is wire the funds directly to the business. And so it cuts you out as that middle person for that transaction. And again, it looks very similar to your reimbursement request, but instead of listing who you've kind of already purchased items from, you're going to write who it's payable to, so who is going to be providing you with the service or those goods. You'll fill out, some invoices have like a specific number on them, some of them don't, so it's all right if you don't put this field in, but you'll include the date of your invoice, similarly a description of what it is that you're purchasing. Same thing, that your event code will always be NA. You'll put the total amount of the invoice. Your event code will be NA, your fiscal year will be the calendar year, and then your account number or your FC number will be the same. We'll ask for you to pick a category that makes sense with your GL codes, and then we will have you sign off on it. One member of the group will sign off on it. And similarly, if you want to know where the funds are coming from as well. So if we are wiring the funds directly to a business, then the business is going to be filling out this ACH form, and they will have to fill out that top section that says business contact information. So they'll fill in that top section, the business will fill in that middle section with all of the actual accounting needs. And similarly, we definitely encourage providing an email address with somebody who is going to kind of check it and make sure that the funds have ended up in the account. And same thing, if you're going to buy multiple items, from a vendor over a long period of time throughout the year. Once a business has submitted the ACH enrollment form once, then they're good to go and they don't have to do it again. And then just two quick things that we want to note about grant-only fiscal sponsorship with City Parks Foundation while you hold your funds. So I mentioned before that your FC account or your kind of bank account with us, we just want to note that it's a one-way account, right? So you're not getting additional donations or grants and putting it into that account. Instead, it's kind of like a one-way street where your grant funds are in there, and through the course of the year, you're going to be spending it down through either reimbursement or invoices. And the other item that we just wanted to mention is that you can remove the tax from purchases that CPF is going to be making directly. So through an invoice or a quote, because CPF is going to put the money directly into that business's bank account, you can remove the tax from those purchases. But if you go to a store and you make the purchase, if I go to the store and I make a purchase out of pocket, you cannot remove the tax from it, right? Because I'm not an accredited non-for-profit, that's tax exempt. But if the payment and the money is coming from City Parks Foundation, then you can remove the tax. And we can talk more about that if it seems kind of like a hazy line, but it's really about who's actually making the payment to that business that they need, you know, that matters the most to them. And that is that. But we can definitely, I think, open it up to, if there's questions. I haven't been checking the chat, but if there's questions about that process, I think we have time to review them.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, and I'll just be, we'll be sending out the paperwork hopefully later this week for everyone and make that accessible. So we have not sent it yet. Maybe you have some similar to when you've had other grants with us, but we'll send you the full packet for this grant hopefully later this week.
Yeah, and we're definitely open to how it is that you can submit those forms to us, so we know that, right, everybody's kind of working remotely right now, and if you need to take a picture on your cell phone and send it to us, some of them are like fillable Excel sheets, so you can type into them, download those documents, and then send them back to us if you want to do a digital signature as opposed to like a handwritten one. So we're definitely open to the ways that you could submit those right now.